Perfect. Thank you so much. So, first of all, I really want to thank the organizers of this festival for giving me this opportunity. It's my privilege to be amongst all of you today. So, just a bit about me before we get into the principles. I have total experience of 31 years, of which 20 years is in IT, and I have been with ThoughtWorks for 10 years. I work with clients across all the 6 continents. Unfortunately, have not worked in Spain. I visited Madrid as a tourist, and I hope to come back again, either personally or officially, sometime in the future after the COVID problem is gone. My expertise is in enterprise agility, in digital and agile transformation, as well as in leadership coaching. And I am the author of this book, which was mentioned, which was a bestseller on Amazon in the new release category. And I've also spoken at 30 plus conferences. And yes, these are physical conferences, not virtual ones, on agile and lean related topics across all the 6 continents. So with that, let me get into the session. But before we go to the principles, I think let's understand a little bit of the context around what are the characteristics of Waterfall versus Agile way of governing things, and what are some of those things that makes it different, right? What does Waterfall value? Waterfall values forecast accuracy. Yeah. So when somebody is preparing a business case, they need to exactly say how much money they are going to spend. And when the progress is being monitored, you're basically being monitored based on, the accuracy of the forecast, which was made a long time ago. And if you are deviating from the forecast, then you are punished, right? It's not looked down upon very well. So I have seen organizations where people who forecasted a certain budget, they were penalized for underspending the budget also. Why? Because if they had forecasted accurately, that money could have been allocated to somebody else. Yeah. So even if people didn't need the money, they would spend it exactly to ensure that, their forecast accuracy is met. The second point is about compliance driven. Now, sure, we have audit requirements and we have other things we need to do. That's fine. But in terms of embracing change, the whole relies on a lot of documentation and a lot of processes, right? So I have seen project managers preparing, 80, 100-page worth of documentation just to get a simple release approved. And that change control board is meeting only once a month. And if they find a single small error in the document, they will throw it back to the project manager and say, come back next month. Yeah. So it's all driven by compliance. The next one is about heavy reporting. There's lots of reports which people prepare. So you mostly look at what middle managers do in waterfall environments. I would say most middle managers spend about 50% of the time just preparing reports for their bosses, right? And the bosses really are relying on these reports to tell them what is happening on the ground. Often the reports, the data is presented in such a way that the bad news is hidden, which anyways get known a little bit later, but by then it's probably late. Waterfall assumes that reality is predictable. Why do I say that? Because let's say, for example, now we are in 2021, and suppose we are in the month of June, which will happen 3-4 months down the line. That's when we start preparing our budget for 2022, right? So the whole process of coming up with your budget for 2022 starts in June 2021. Then there's a whole list of approvals and a lot of documentation, a lot of validation that happens of that data, and the budget is prepared for year 2022, right? Which means that the numbers that you have put in the second quarter of the second half of 2021 are assumed to be valid for all of 2022, right? So it is assuming that nothing is going to change, reality is predictable, and you should be able to forecast that right up front. Okay? And the last one about waterfall is that it resists change. Yeah. So the whole point is that once we agree on a budget, yeah, there is no question of changing it. Once we decide that we are going to do this initiative, there is no question of changing it. If something comes in between, it's too bad a problem, right? I mean, you did not show up at the time of our budget, so therefore there is no question that we can accommodate you, right? That's the approach of waterfall. Let's move to agile. What does that mean? The main characteristic
Pasemos
of agile.
a ágil. ¿Qué significa? Pues la agilidad que es capaz de pivotar.
I'm hearing someone. I hope the person can be on mute. Okay, the first point is about nimbleness to pivot, which means that if something is not working, we should be able to stop. If there is some new opportunity that has come up, we should be able to capture on it, right? And we should be able to change our priorities as needed and as we get feedback from the external environment. So that's one part of it. The other and most critical differentiator of Agile is that it is value driven. There is always a relentless focus on delivering value to our stakeholders, be it the customer, be it the organization, or be it any other stakeholder. But the focus is about delivering maximum value as early as possible. Yeah. The third point is about seeing is believing. What do I mean by this? So when agile teams work, in sprints or in iterations, at the end of every sprint or iteration, they are supposed to produce working software, right? So there is no question of, somebody relying on some percentage completion in a report. Here, you have to actually show what you have created within that given sprint or iteration. And you've got to do that in every single sprint. My request to leaders is go down to these showcases. You'll learn a lot. You'll understand what was committed, what was done, if something was not done, why it was blocked, all of those things. The next one, it is driven by reality, which means that the feedback loops are very strong, and the feedback reaches very quickly. So the organization is nimble enough, or the team is nimble enough to adapt to reality and to adapt to changing feedback, which is coming from the market. Again, people try experiments. By definition, experiments carry a risk of failure. Some will work, some will not work, right? And when something does not work, that's the reality you must accept. And you have to stop those. And some things which are working, you have to double up more on those. So that's what Agile focuses on. And the last one is obviously embraces change. We all know this. This is part of the core Agile principles as well as the manifesto. Responding to change over following a plan, welcome changes even late in development. Change, embracing change is so core to agility, and the governance is aligned to that if you are governing for Agile projects. Okay, let's get to the Agile principles now. Outcome over activity and output. So Agile governance should focus or must focus or on outputs rather than outcomes rather than on activity and outputs. What do I mean by output? Yeah, okay, we delivered so many story points, or we delivered so many stories, or we have spent so much money out of the budget. Yeah, those are activities and outputs. I'm not saying we don't track those, but what we also need to track is, are our users satisfied? Yeah, did we deliver the functionality which delighted the user? Are the business benefits coming in, based on what our hypothesis was? So the outcome has to be the most important thing that you measure, and that is what should drive your decision making in terms of the feedback that you get. Activity and outputs, they are secondary to outcomes. Next one, value over volume. So this again we said, right? So volume is about the extent of work that is done. It's not about how much time was spent or how many story points we created or how much code we wrote. It is about the delivery of value to customers and how satisfied they are. So your measure of success cannot be volume. Your measure of success in Agile governance has to be the value that you have delivered, and of course the outcomes which has been achieved by delivering that value. Next one is about trends and patterns over absolute numbers. So look at absolute numbers. Why do they matter? Because when you're in an environment when you are valuing forecasting accuracy, absolute numbers matter. Then you're focused on every number and say any deviation from that number, right, is something which is not looked at well at all. When a number is predicted, you better stick to it. And all numbers can be looked in isolation, and the variances become very, very important when you're analyzing whether the project is governed well or not, right? But what happens in an Agile kind of a scenario is that things are changing so fast. You need to achieve an outcome, but the line can be a little bit wavy. You look at a velocity line of any Agile team, it's never going to be a straight line. Yeah, there's always going to be ups and downs. But as long as the slope of the line is what is expected to be, is that, and as long as you're on track to meet your deadlines based on the progress that you're making, that is important. The second point about patterns is that when you are working with a complex system, there is no way you can predict something accurately. And therefore, you always need to rely on patterns. And those patterns will tell you whether things are going well or not going well. And you have to look at patterns which are telling you things which don't go well, and stop those, and look for those patterns where things are going well, and you can encourage those to happen more. And this is not just about delivering value. This could be about behaviors. This could be about the way in which we prioritize our projects. This is the way in which we are looking at different initiatives, and how do we bring them into our organization. All of those things, you can look at patterns, and you can actually align your value propositions based on those patterns. The next one is about team success over individual success. Now, again, the individual success mindset comes from the manufacturing era, right? People are rewarded for individual performance, and this even continues in knowledge work. See, what we realize in software is that software development is a team effort. It is not that people produce whatever they need to produce and it just comes together, right? The team with different skills, the self-organizing cross-functional team has to work together. And only when all the people with the different skills come together and make things happen, does success happen on an agile project. Yeah. So the agile governance in terms of success, in terms of what's working well, in terms of the outcomes which are created by the team, is looked at the team level over individual level. The next one is about transparency over confidentiality. Yeah. So if you go, I mean, we are right now in a COVID environment, but if you are co-located, you will see there's a lot of information radiators on the wall, which people get to come and see. So even if the CEO of an organization wants to know a project status, they can just come to the information radiator, look at it, and they will know exactly what is happening. There is one and only one single source of truth, which is there in agile governance, and everybody sees the same information. And there is no question of hiding it. It's all visible. It's all there. Yeah. There are no separate reports for clients and separate reports internally. Yeah. That's an anti-pattern that we often see when people are not transparent, right? The other part about confidentiality is when big bosses rely only on the reports and middle managers are busy preparing reports for them, right? What often you end up with is numbers which are not in line with reality. And because those reports are prepared in such a way, those reports are kept confidential and not shared with the team, because often those reports don't align with the reality, as they are masking a lot of information which is bad news. Right. We spoke about this, but this is an important thing to highlight, right? Flexible budgeting over big bang budgeting. In a large organization or in a waterfall kind of an environment, right, which are following this big bang budgeting process, you really missed out on any opportunity that comes beyond the budget. There is really no room to accommodate newer opportunities that come along. But what does flexible budgeting mean? Flexible budgeting means that your budgeting and the way you release your funds for any initiative is like a startup. It's like a venture fund for a startup. So how do venture funds give money to startups? You have a value proposition, you give round one funding. They show value, only then you get the next round of funding. You show more value, you get more round of funding, right? So it is all based on evidence of value. And that's why the budget is flexible. And suppose something is not working, you stop, you cut your loss, and you move on, right? But what happens in a big bang budgeting kind of a scenario? It's very difficult to stop a project because we predicted something, then it shows that we went wrong. Then it's a sunk cost fallacy that comes into picture, and that's a problem. So flexible budgeting is something like similar to how venture capital funds give money to startups. That's the way that should happen in an agile project or a program. Next is conversation over reports. Yeah, so as we said, reports only tell you some numbers, and often those numbers are dressed or masked up for top management. But as I said, if you go to a showcase, you will not only see what is happening, but you will have conversation with team members to understand their morale, their spirit, what are the blockers they are facing, what help do they need. Everything will become visible through conversation, and reports will definitely not be in a position to replace a meaningful conversation with the team. So conversation is a core principle of agile-based governance. And the last but not the least, systems thinking over local optimization. Okay, I go back to the budget example again. Marketing is given a budget, sales is given a budget, IT is given a budget, what it is, right? And then it is all siloed up. So if marketing has money which is unused, that money cannot be allocated to any other department so easily until the whole year is finished, right? Because you don't know what's going to come up. It's like it's my budget. I control that money. It's all about optimizing locally each department. But in an agile way of doing things, you're looking at the entire value stream. You're looking at a value proposition. You're optimizing for that value proposition. And you're funding that value proposition across the departments. And that's when you will get the maximum return on your investment. Your money will be put in the right place to deliver value and to create the maximum returns. And this is not just about money allocation. This systems thinking works in agile governance in terms of looking at obstacles, in terms of looking at dependencies within the value stream. All of those things need to be managed from a systemic perspective. And when you do that is when you deliver value effectively and efficiently. With that, I conclude my session. Thank you very much. If we have time, I'm happy to take questions. So thank you once again for giving me this opportunity.